My guest this morning is Dr. J.Stuart Ablon, or if we do it J.Stuart Ablon, we could put the Ph.D. behind it. So you can put the doctor first, or you can put the Ph.D. at the end. Either way, he's a doctor. And so Dr. Ablon is the author of the books Changeable, and it's a play on words, and we're going to talk about that, but I love it. It's actually, when you see it, it's changeable, but if you see it on the cover, it's change hyphenated able. We'll talk about that as we go through the year. The School Discipline Fix and Treating Explosive Kids. Oh, I have to read those as well. He's associate professor at Harvard Medical School, founder and director of Think Kids, and Thomas G. Stemberg Endowed Chair in Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, Department of Psychiatry, Massachusetts General Hospital. A dynamic and engaging speaker, ranked number 5 on the list of the world's top-rated keynote speakers in the academic arena. All right, now, teaches the collaborative problem-solving approach to parents, educators, clinicians, managers, leaders, and organizations throughout the world. Ladies and gentlemen, we are welcoming to the Reading Circle microphones, Dr. J.Stuart Ablon. Dr. Ablon, good morning.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for rising early to join me. As we were sharing earlier, it is early morning on a Saturday morning talk show, and it is live, so I'm always extremely appreciative of my guests for joining me. But at the same time, the message is so important that we're going to talk about this morning, so it will be archived on the YouTube channel. But for those of you who are in the listening audience, this is an interview, again, that you want to. This is not one that's like one of our novels that we have or that's necessarily about entertainment, but it is an issue that I know is real because I face these issues on a daily basis as the principal of an elementary and middle school in an urban area, a severely impoverished urban area, a very low economic urban area, and all those things feed into the problems and the issues and the challenges that we face. Because of the issues that are coming from the various home lives, it impacts the children in the academic arena, as I was just talking about. And as I was sharing with Dr. Ablon, in many instances, the first reaction for people is to punish. Like everything is about punitive. Now, there's a difference between discipline and punishment. And I'm constantly preaching that message with my team of folks that I work with. There's a difference between discipline. Discipline, if you get into the real definition of the word discipline, it really is about teaching, versus punishment is about inflicting pain. All right? Whether it's psychological pain, emotional pain, whatever, it's about inflicting pain. Dr. Ablon's book that we're going to talk about, because we're going to talk about all of it actually, but Changeable, the one that caught my attention, is about a different approach to dealing with challenges that actually is, to a degree, the reverse, or I don't even know if reverse is the right word, but it's a different, and in my mind, a more effective approach than punitive. So that's what we're going to be talking about this morning as we talk about Dr. Ablon's work. So again, Dr. Ablon, good morning. Talk to me a little bit about where did all this begin? Because I know in the opening of the book, we're talking about in a psychiatric hospital or in the hospital or what have you, about the patients and some of the challenges the attendants face. So where did this all begin for you?
Well, where this all began for me was really working with families in the very beginning. That's sort of how this work all began, working with families who had extremely challenging kids. And just what you were saying, the standard ways of trying to help them, which are largely punitive, or I guess we could call them motivational in nature, which is sort of, assume the kid's capable of behaving better if he just wants to, and what you got to do is make him want to, through rewards and consequences and things like that. That stuff not only wasn't working with these kids, it was actually making things much worse. And so I started working along with a colleague with families, trying to help them, at the same time doing a lot of research about what helps people under certain situations and what causes challenging behavior in the first place. And ultimately, we started extending our work, which was really resonating with families, which, as you said, was a very different way of thinking about what causes challenging behavior, and then very different ideas about what to do if that's what's causing it. That work then was extended to all kinds of other places. So we started working in psychiatric hospitals and then in places like residential treatment facilities where you've got some of the most traumatized kids in the country. And after that, we actually started doing work in schools, therapeutic schools, regular education schools, all kinds of places. And at this point, we've worked all over the world with police forces, foster care agencies, you name it. And what we're even seeing is how this work applies in all of our everyday lives as well.
And again, what we're talking about here is a collaborative approach. And as I said, Dr. Ablon's book is Changeable. And if you see it, again, Paul, the letters together, it's changeable. So either way you look at it, you have the opportunity to make change. Now, as I was saying in my little preamble there, a lot of times we feel, and it's a tough sell for many people, that the only way to change somebody is to punish them, that if they do something that they're not supposed to be doing or their behavior is not what you want it to be, then you have to immediately jump to punishment. And I know in the school setting, generally, the most egregious remedy that we have for trying to change behavior would be a suspension. And a lot of times, my teachers and folks that work with me, that's immediately what they're looking for when a child doesn't do what they want them to do or they feel are misbehaving in the classroom setting or in the school setting. Immediately, they're looking for that child to be out of their presence for 3 to 5 to 10 days. And what Dr. Ablon is saying is that may not be getting us what we want. So I'll tell you what, Dr. Ablon, let's talk a little bit about the collaborative approach. Let's explain to the listening audience exactly what that is.
Yeah, well, I think the first thing for us to explain is we're talking about a very different approach, and it all stems from a very different understanding of what causes challenging behavior in the first place. Because the reality is that the reason that our punitive approaches don't work is they're barking up the wrong tree with these kids, or for that matter, anybody who behaves in a very challenging way. And, it's really interesting because we have sort of believed the same thing about what causes challenging behavior for a long time now, even though there's actually been like 50 years of research in the neurosciences at this point that have shown beyond the shadow of a doubt that our beliefs about what causes challenging behavior are wrong. And when I'm talking about our beliefs, I'm talking about, what you might call conventional wisdom. And the conventional wisdom is, as I alluded to earlier, that when people behave badly, it's because they're unmotivated to behave better. And that's why we go in the direction of rewards and consequences and things like this to try to incentivize people to behave better. But what all that research has shown, and at this point all of our experience in those settings I was talking about has verified, is that people who exhibit challenging behavior, not just once in a while, but chronic challenging behavior, they don't actually lack the will to behave well.
Right.
What they lack are the skills to behave well. And what we tell people is that, it's almost like you should think about it like a learning disability, where, when I was a kid in grade school, we didn't know much about learning disabilities. If a kid struggled to read, we thought they were lazy or dumb. And if we thought they were lazy, we tried to motivate them to read, which it turns out was awful because, ironically, who was trying harder than anybody else in the classroom to read? That kid to whom it didn't come naturally. And we're finally starting to realize the same is true of behavior, that guess who's trying harder than anybody else to behave themselves well? Ironically, poorly behaved people. And the reason is it doesn't come naturally to them because they struggle with skill, not will. And I'll tell you, now that we can do things like image the brain, it's even clearer. Because you talk about, for instance, kids who are grown up in very impoverished areas, and one of the things we know about exposure to chronic stress, like poverty, is it impacts the brain.
Correct.
And what we can literally see kids exposed to poverty in childhood, their brains look different. And what we see is the areas of the brain that are affected are exactly the areas of the brain that are involved in the skills that we see these kids struggling with that leads to their challenging behavior. And I think it would be helpful for folks if I was a little bit more specific when I say, people who struggle with their behavior struggle with skill, not will. The skills I'm talking about are things like flexibility, frustration tolerance, problem solving. So people who struggle with their behavior, they literally have delays in the development of those kinds of skills: flexibility, frustration tolerance, problem solving. Now, so the first part of our approach is a massive shift in mindset away from this as a lack of will to the more accurate, humane, and compassionate view that this is about a lack of skill. And then that opens up the door for completely different interventions. Because, you wouldn't use rewards and consequences to try to fix dyslexia.
Right.
That's dumb. That doesn't make any sense.
Right.
And in fact, not only will it not work, it'll make the kid feel worse because it'll reinforce the idea that you think they're just not trying hard enough. And if they try harder and can't do it because they lack the skill, not will, eventually they're going to give up too.
No, you're absolutely right. And matter of fact, that line in there probably when you talk about the trying to shift mindset and philosophy, I think I use that line the most. Now, you need to understand this thing. It's not about the will. It's about the skill. I started breaking it down very similar to what you just said in terms of you have to stop looking at it as if someone is doing this to you intentionally. In terms of, and I know you use in the book the example of Susan about going to the brand new school. And even for parents, because this not only applies, as Dr. Ablon just said, in the school setting, we do this in our homes to kids, not understanding the thought process. So in the first chapter of the book, in Changeable, Dr. Ablon talks about this little girl named Susan who goes to a new school and she starts acting out. She starts doing temper tantrums. She starts doing it. So it says her well-intentioned parents were trying to force their inflexible child to do something she wasn't capable of doing. See, when you start looking at it from the standpoint of, as he said, skill versus will or capability versus incapability, it will reframe how you approach or intervene.
That's right. And I want to be clear that it's not just a nicer way of thinking about these kids, a more hopeful way, and we've shown much more effective way. It's more accurate. So, if we, like at your school, for instance, right, it sounds like you've got a whole bunch of kids who struggle with their behavior, not surprisingly. If I brought them all back to Massachusetts General Hospital where I work, and let's say we took 100 of them and we had them all tested with what we call neuropsychological evaluations that look at neurocognitive skills. So the skills that we can perform due to certain parts of our brain functioning in different ways. If we looked at the results of those tests versus kids randomly selected around the country at the same age and matched for gender and ethnicity and everything else, and we compared the two groups, what you'd see is that kids who really struggle with their behavior, those kids have delays in these neurocognitive domains. So it's a fact. It's not just a nice belief. It is a fact that behavior is determined by skill, not will. And again, I think that the uplifting news here is, skills can be developed. That's
correct. And you went exactly where my next question was going to go in terms of, okay, if it is a skill like any other skill, can we develop it? And you're going there, so keep going.
Yeah, well, of course, you can develop any skill if you practice. And I don't care how bad somebody is at something. If you practice it repeatedly, you can get better. You may not get somebody who's, really, really struggles with something to be the best in the world at something, but you can improve their skills for sure. And what we've shown when we've worked with the toughest of the toughest and in the toughest situations as well, we've confirmed. We've studied this with our own research. And what's really cool is we've shown not only kids can develop these, what I call neurocognitive, which is a fancy way of saying sort of thinking skills. Not only can kids develop skills like flexibility and frustration tolerance and problem solving, but we adults, it turns out, we can change our brains still too. So you can even teach an old dog new tricks. And so we've shown when adults use this approach, we can build our skills too.
And
so see, it's all, sorry, I was going to say it all starts with the shift in mindset.
Correct.
Because if you're focused on motivating people to behave better, you're going to miss the boat on practicing skill. And again, I think, I just want to emphasize, Mark, that it reinforces incorrect and harmful views that people hold about themselves. And I always share with people some great wisdom from my 102-year-old grandfather.
Wow.
Who lives closer to you there. He's in New York. He grew up in Tupelo, Mississippi in the beginning of the century. And one of the things he always says to me when I was a kid, I spent a lot of time with him growing up, and he used to always say to me, he'd say, if you give a dog a name, eventually they'll answer to it.
Right.
If you give a dog a name, eventually they'll answer to it. He's like, look, dogs don't have names, but you call them something for a while and they start answering to it. And the reality is that's true with folks who struggle with their behavior as well. If you are constantly trying to motivate somebody to behave better, you are implicitly teaching that person that you think they're not trying hard enough. And we shouldn't be surprised if we sort of send kids the message that we think they're lazy, unmotivated, don't care, aren't trying hard enough. We shouldn't be surprised if over time they start to look like and talk like and even act like kids who are lazy, unmotivated, don't care, aren't trying hard enough, because in essence, we're convincing them of that about themselves.
Wow,
so this
mindset
shift is huge. The mindset shift is massive. We can talk about how you build the skills and things like that, but none of it's possible unless you shift mindset in the first place.
That's absolutely right in terms of the view of what's being done. Because a lot of people I know at least a lot of the teachers I work, they actually take what the child is doing personally. It's like the child's not doing anything personally to you. It may feel that way, but that's not the case. So that's why the knee-jerk reaction is and I tell them all the time, you just want to get some get back, as I call it. You just want to get that child back for making your life miserable for those few minutes. I get it.
Yeah, well, the thing is, let's be clear about something. These skills I'm talking about, like frustration tolerance, we adults can struggle with them too.
Yes.
And when a kid's disrupting your whole class or your day or disrespecting you, or we lose our ability to think clearly as well.
Right.
In my world, we have a fancy name for what happens when we start to lose our cool in the midst of frustration. We call it dysregulation. And one of the things we always say about dysregulation is it's contagious. And so you have a kid getting dysregulated, the adult's going to go right there with them most of the time.
Correct.
And then it gets ugly on us. And so again, it just points you back to mindset, because what you're trying to do is help people realize not to take it personally. That disrespect isn't it's disrespectful behavior, but they're not intending to disrespect you. What they're doing is responding poorly to a situation they lack the skills to handle better.
That's
and
correct.
When you take that view, it helps depersonalize it a little bit.
That is correct. And I love that term, deregulation. How did you say that again? Deregulation?
Dysregulation.
Dysregulation. Okay, I'll have to start using that next week when I go back into the building. Dysregulation. That's absolutely
fancy,
it. But what you just said in terms of now, with the person who is feeling that way, dealing with the child or the adult, the collaborative approach, or the approach that you're talking about in your books, actually will cut down on some of the frustration. Now, in the beginning, it may seem a little tedious. It may seem whatever you may think it may seem. But in the long haul, it will cut down on some of this dysregulation. And where I'm going with this is there's examples in the book where you're saying the person that's not exhibiting the behavior that you want, you would actually bring them in as a part of the problem solving. Like they would have to help with the solution of the issue.
That's right. Actually, it's funny because you and I were talking before we went live on the air here about how, unfortunately, some people believe at first blush that this approach sounds sort of soft and things like that. And they always say to me, like, if you, have conversations with kids or anybody who's behaving poorly, like, how are you going to hold them accountable? And how are they going to take responsibility for their actions? And I always tell them, hold on a second. Like being a passive recipient of a consequence, that's a really lame way of holding somebody accountable, honestly. Like, actually, if that person has to problem solve with you, they have to work together with you, do the hard work of solving the problem so it doesn't happen again. Isn't that like the ultimate form of accountability? They're on the hook to solve the problem so it doesn't happen again. Hard work, and in my mind, that's taking responsibility.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And I started doing that myself. When I told you, when children come to my office, I'll say, all right, look, kid, you have the choice between the sermon or the suspension. Which one are you going to take? So every now and again, the kid will say, oh, I'm tired of hearing you. I'll take the suspension, or you're not getting it. But we'll actually, and those will be my line of, okay, look, we have an issue here. You're running out of class without permission. You can get hurt. What am I supposed to tell your parents? How are we going to fix this? And you're right. They will sit there and look up in the air and to find, no. You're going to sit there until you tell me what we're going to do and how we're going to fix it together.
That's a really good one. The sermon or the suspension. I'm going to have to relay that to others. And, I know you're partially joking around here, but it's funny because, people often think that, all right, well, the alternative, if you're not going to suspend a kid, is that, you're sort of going to talk at them. And what we teach in collaborative problem solving is a structure that says, no, this is not sort of us preaching to the kid about just what they need to do differently. Because, our feeling is if they could, they would. I mean, this is one of the biggest underlying sort of philosophies behind our work is when you're talking about kids do well if they can. If a kid could do well, he would do well. If she could do well, she would do well. Like, I've never met a kid who prefers doing poorly to doing well, who wants to get suspended and stuff like that. So our feeling is, look, it's just not as simple as they got to be told what's right, what's wrong, and motivated to do what's right. They know the difference between right and wrong, and if they could, they would. So, these conversations are aimed at really getting to the bottom of what is hard about things for a kid, given their skills that they struggle with, and how can we come up with solutions that are realistic given their skills, address their concerns as well as ours, and solve the problem in an actual durable way, instead of being, sort of one of these wishful thinking discussions that we sort of feel like we said our piece, but we know there's not a snowball's chance in hell the behavior is actually
right. That's exactly right. And see, like you were sharing with your grandfather, one of the things my mom says and still says, she's 80, she'll be 81 in October. But in any event, one of the things as kids we constantly heard her and my father say was, it all starts in the home. And what you're talking about here in terms of the skill versus the will is, in many instances, especially like in an area where I serve, those skills are not addressed or taught in the home because the parents in and of themselves may or may not have had them. I mean, my average, at the time when I was teaching 8th grade, now 8th grade is about 13, 14 years old. My average age parent was 28. So you're talking someone that had the child around 13, 14, 15, that was a child, him or herself. Probably didn't have the skill, will either, so they wouldn't be able to teach it. So we're dealing with a lot of kids that, one, that skill that Dr. Ablon's talking about was never taught to begin with. Now, in my house as kids, those skills were taught. My mom and dad did teach me and my sister. So when we went to school, teachers didn't have issues out of us. But there are children who that skill is not taught, so they never knew or know that they have it to begin with. And I agree with you. I don't think any human being in and of itself wants to be the bad kid. I mean, they're doing what they're doing for reasons.
And I would just extend that, though, what you're talking about now, to us parents. What I like to say is, look, parents do well if they can, too. I mean, a parent wants their kid to be poorly behaved at home or at school and be getting all these calls from a principal like you or something like that. And so, if a parent is struggling with their kid's behavior, it may be because the parent struggles with some of those skills as well.
Correct.
I do want to point out something, though, that just like a reading disability, it is not as simple as you parent a kid well and they're going to have these skills.
Right.
So, people ask me all the time, is this about nature or nurture? And I say to people, I got an easy answer for you. Yes. It's about both.
That's right.
And parenting is really important, but I'll tell you, I work with some of the most amazing parents, the most skilled parents in the world, the most empathic, active, engaged, effective parents, and they can have really challenging kids. And another interesting thing we see in our own clinics at Mass General, we see families walking in all the time with a really challenging kid and a sibling or two who's extremely well behaved.
Right.
And you can't point that finger and say, well, so those parents are bad parents with one kid and good with another. It's more complicated. And some kids are literally born wired to struggle with flexibility, frustration tolerance, problem solving. And just like we wouldn't say we used to say if a kid couldn't read at school, we'd blame his parents that mom wasn't reading to him before bed or something. And we know it's not that simple. It's much more complicated. And so the same is true with challenging behavior. Sometimes parents are struggling to figure out how to effectively parent. Other times it has nothing to do with the parent. And this is literally just how the kid was wired. And Other times it has to do with exposure to chronic stress or trauma in the
Right.
kid's life, which delays brain development. So, I'm a psychologist, psychiatry. We have a long history of blaming parents for
Right.
all kinds of stuff. And, what all the research ends up showing is we're usually wrong about that.
Right.
Whether it's like, we used to call, we used to have a thing called the schizophrenogenic mother, where we thought cold moms caused schizophrenia, which, is ridiculous. Now we know it's a, complicated genetically based disorder. We used to think the same thing with autism. We used to call it refrigerator mothers, think cold moms caused autism. So, I just want to point out on the show today that we got to stop throwing parents under the bus.
Correct.
Parents are really important, but we're not, we're not the sole cause of anything that our kids struggle with. And we're doing the best we can to handle these things also.
Absolutely. And that's, to be honest with you, I was not trying to do that at all. But at the same time, going back to what you were talking, the example in terms of what the child hears and is called, your grandfather was absolutely right, because a lot of the kids that I serve, sadly, what they're constantly being told about themselves is like they're little crap heads. You're no good.
Right.
You're like your father.
Right.
They're and that's so. Whenever they come to us and they come in, I'm constantly trying to help run stuff on as if you have to keep affirming them, even if they're not whatever it is that you're telling. Just keep telling them you're great. Like we'll end every morning meeting with, "We're going to have a great day today. Have a great Napier Academy day." So I'll have them look to each other and say, "I'm going to have a great day today." Constant affirmation, because I know what they're struggling and hearing. And there's something else you just said too. Some of our kids, because of the traumas and everything, they're born with that. I have a lot of children in my building on medication. And I don't know, does medication, I'm kind of like straddle the fence on that. Without a doubt, I can tell a child when they're not taking their meds. And at the same time, you just wonder, is the med helping or hurting?
Yeah, well, the answer is it could be either. And, I'm on the fence, too, in the sense that sometimes I see medicine doing a fair amount of harm, and sometimes I see it life-saving for kids and others. And to me, it all comes back to sort of the central question of my work has been, what causes challenging behavior?
Right.
And right now, so far with you today, I've talked big picture, things like flexibility and frustration tolerance and problem solving. But the reality is you can do a good assessment, and you can get much more specific detail about what's causing a kid's behavior. And actually, we've got a little assessment instrument people can download right off our website and use free, and does a very good job of, we tested it compared to full neuropsychological evaluations, does a very good job of helping people home in on which specific skills. And this is important when it comes to things like medicine, because let me give you some examples. If you dial up the specificity we're talking about with skills some here, what could be causing the challenging behavior could be things like language and communication skill deficits, or it could be attention and memory skill deficits, or it could be flexible thinking deficits or social thinking deficits. And, that's where it helps us figure out what we're going to do about the problem, because let's say a kid has really poor attentional skills and really poor impulse control. Well, actually, there's some medicines that can help with that. But if the kid is really inflexible and has really poor social skills,
right.
Well, we don't have a gray pill for black and white thinkers.
Right. Right.
So it's all, you got to make sure you're barking up the right tree with your interventions, what you're doing to try to fix the problem. And medicine can help for some of the things that lead to challenging behavior. Some of the things it's not going to help, and then it might actually even make matters worse and make it hard to even understand, what's going on for a kid. So, it's complicated.
It was interesting you brought up the communication piece, because I had just turned to that chapter prior to you saying that, because there's a chapter on language and communication skills, the meaning of I don't give a, and those you can read the book to get what I'm talking about. But it's hardly surprising that the majority of children with specific language disorders also have psychiatric issues and behavioral difficulties. Both children and adults with language and communication issues can become easily frustrated when unable to express their concerns. Sometimes this frustration leads to explosive behavior, but it can also lead to what adults might regard as passive-aggressive behavior. As I've seen in my practice, older kids and some adults will sometimes compensate for language and communication deficits by saying things like, "This is stupid." They don't think it's stupid, but they're used to the world not giving them enough time to process speech. They've learned that it's easier just to miss someone or something as stupid. Now, what we get a lot of times, we'll get that plus or either "I don't care."
Oh, yeah,
and as soon as when I got to this child, immediately I said, "Oh, ha, ha." That's because we know, like, yes, you do care, but that is the line. I don't care. I'm gonna call your mother. I don't care. I don't care.
And it's so funny because I was talking about the philosophy behind our work earlier. Kids do well if they can, not kids do well if they want to.
Right.
And I try to teach that philosophy to people, and then they go out and try to apply it. And the kid will say to them just that. They'll be like, look them in the eyes and be like, "I don't care." And they'll say to me, I told you this was about him not caring." And this is where I quote my grandfather. I'm not surprised he says, "I don't care."
Right.
If you give a dog a name, eventually they'll answer to it. If we've been using, motivational systems to try to, a sticker chart and rewards and stuff like that forever to try to motivate a kid to behave better, we shouldn't be surprised when the kid starts to believe us.
Correct.
That they don't care. So, that's the best they're doing at that point, but that's not an accurate representation of what's going on.
No, it really isn't. And the other thing, and you just touched on it as well, is that I really loved about was this whole notion of the difference between extrinsic versus intrinsic, that we've got to move folks into the intrinsic versus always the extrinsic. And what I'm talking about, listening audience, is exactly what Dr. Ablon was just talking about, this constant having to reward behavior that you ought to be getting anyway. I mean, we have here in New Jersey, I think it's countrywide probably, but I know we've been doing it here. It's called Positive Behavior Supports in School, PBSIS. Whereas you're constantly having to reward children for walking down the hallway correctly, for not yelling back at the teacher. I mean, you have to give them something. What does that set up, though, in terms of, if that's what you're doing with children, what type of adult does that set yourself up for?
Yeah. Well, a couple things. First of all, PBIS actually has a lot of great components to it, but for some reason, well, I actually know the reason, people tend to gravitate to the part of it that actually doesn't go so well.
Right, that's the biggest part of it that we gravitated towards.
Yeah, but that's actually, interestingly, not the biggest part of how it's supposed to be applied, but that's a whole other story. But the reason people gravitate to this piece is because it's familiar. That's what they know how to do, right? But the problem is, so if you overuse rewards, if you're constantly dangling things in front of kids' faces, it creates all kinds of problems. One problem is, if you do it too much, whenever you ask a kid to do something, they're going to look at you and be like, "What are you going to give me?" Right. Which, really pisses us off as teachers and parents, because we feel like we're being held hostage. But the reality is that's just a case of you reap what you sow. That's just a kid throwing back at us what, we've taught them. If we're constantly saying, if you do this, you get this, we shouldn't be surprised when we ask kids to do something. They're like, "What are you going to give me?" Because that's what they've learned. So we actually create that problem. But the other problem we create, it's really interesting because there have been, I'm not exaggerating here, thousands of studies that have shown that when you use a reward, a tangible reinforcer, like something you're dangling in front, you say, if you do this, you get this, to try to make somebody do something, it actually has the opposite effect on their intrinsic, their internal drive. So what that means is the more you try to motivate somebody externally, actually the more you eat away at their internal drive. There's a strong negative correlation between emphasizing external reinforcement and developing internal drive. So we actually demotivate kids, and even worse, other research has shown it encourages unethical behavior, which is not a big surprise because in essence, the kids do get more motivated, not intrinsically, but they get more motivated, but not to do what we want them to do. They get more motivated to get the stuff that they want. Correct. And in essence, they look for ways to get the stuff without even having to do what we want. So, there are so many dangers. Wow. And in addition, let's just be clear, those are the side effects of using these approaches, but let's be clear about the main effect. The main effect is they don't work. We're barking up the wrong tree. They don't change behavior because this is a lack of skill, not will. And in addition to not working, that's the main effect, they have these side effects of demotivating kids, making them feel terrible about themselves, encouraging unethical behavior, you name it.
No, I mean, you're absolutely right. And really for me, another flag went up when I got to that part. And I said, that is absolutely right. And that's what we're developing here. Like you said, you're getting what you're putting out there. You're reaping what you're sowing in terms of if every time the child has to do it naturally, they should do it, they have to expect a reward. That's what we've trained them to expect. And so, exactly right. So again, I just think, we got to be very careful because you will now have a child that comes up that way. Now, when they become an adult, is going to feel the same way. That, like, okay, I'll do it, but you got to. And the other key important, and there's a very subtle difference of what Dr. Ablon just said. There's a difference between doing what you're supposed to do because you're supposed to do it, and then you receive something, versus I'm only doing it for the stuff, whatever I'm going to get, the toy or the whatever.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing is, there's been a ton of research on how to actually foster the right kind of drive, right, motivation, internal drive. And it's so interesting, Mark, because what are the factors that lead us humans to having internal drive? And let's be clear, this applies to us. Like,
correct.
What motivates you to get into your studio at 6:00 every Saturday morning for the last 18 years or whatever it is? I guarantee that what motivates that is some form of intrinsic drive too. And intrinsic drive is determined by three basic psychological needs. And those are competence, autonomy, and connectedness. And if I'm using less fancy words, what does that mean? We have to feel good at something. We have to feel we've got some independence, and we have to feel connected to other people when we do it if we're going to be intrinsically driven. And so, for you, that means you have to feel good at your job. You do a good show, right?
I'm sitting here listening to that. And that's amazing, because the fact that you said those three is because this is, for me, is not a paid gig. This is something I've been doing just as a unique opportunity to be on radio, just a unique opportunity. Like you said, all three of those things are exactly, because people look at me like I have three heads, and I say, wait a minute, you don't get paid for that? No, I don't get paid for that, not monetarily. But,
right. Well, you must feel good at it.
Correct.
You must feel like you must enjoy the independence that you
correct.
Get to figure out who you want to have on the show, what you want to talk about, and you must enjoy connecting with your guests and your audience. And if you didn't have those things, you wouldn't be showing up unless somebody was paying you. And if you were showing up only because somebody's paying you, here's the really interesting news: you'd be doing a bad job.
Correct.
So we know what fosters intrinsic drive. And we know that using external reinforcers actually gets in the way of it. And again, it's just time for us to pay attention to all this research that we've known for decades now and focus on the right things.
No, it really is. Now, for those of you not listening, guys, I hope you've been with me since 6, and definitely, if not 6, since 7, because my guest this morning is Dr. J.Stuart Ablon. He has spent the last 25 years trying to help people change some of the most challenging behavior in the most challenging settings. Places like prisons, psychiatric hospitals, treatment facilities, and some of the toughest schools in the toughest neighborhoods in the U.S. And here's what, and we've been talking about this, he and his colleagues have learned that we are all able to change as long as we recognize that behavior is a matter of skill, not will. When someone is behaving in a challenging way, it's not because they aren't trying hard enough to behave better. It's because they lack the skills to do so. Skills like flexibility, frustration, tolerance, and problem solving. Now, this is something, as an educator, prior to coming to education, I was in corporate America for 15 years. This is almost my 20th year in education. And we do, in my view, this is my opinion, but I don't think I'm the only one, but we really do and say some ludicrous things in education. And I'll give you an example. For our special education population, whenever we have all these various state tests, well, they'll look at me and says, Mr. Medley, they can take all the time they want. They can take as long as they need. Everybody else is on the general ed students, they have this X amount of time, but the special ed students, they can take as long as they need. And I look at them and say, if I don't know physics, I don't care how many hours you give me. I'm still not going to know it. But this is going back to this whole thing, like you're talking about, the skill versus the will. That if the skill is not there, you're not going to get what you desire. Yet we automatically jump to they're willfully, and we talked about this earlier, that they're willfully doing what they're doing. And it is a change in mindset. And as I was saying before we came on the air, it is a tough sell. Talk to me a little bit about in terms of filters. Like, and I'm basing everything on a school setting. Many of my teachers may have not grown up with the experiences, or they're filtering or processing information based on their experiences. So the aberrant behavior that they're seeing out of the children just does not connect with them. How do you go about it? And you've been doing this for over the more than 25 years now. How do you go about chipping away at that mindset of everything does not have to be either the reward with the toy or either the punishment?
Yeah, well, I think it's all about, honestly, making sure that you listen to folks first and what they're concerned about. I mean, I haven't, somebody asked me on another interview recently, they asked me what they thought was a really hard question. They were like, how do you get somebody to listen to you when they just don't want to listen to you? Like, you're trying to tell them this stuff, but they don't want to hear it. And I said, I don't actually find it that hard to get people to listen to you, but what you got to do, it's like fairly foolproof, honestly, is you got to listen to them. And if you listen really hard to somebody first, you're going to find that people are going to listen back. And so, what I found over the years is if I want people to listen to what I have to say about this collaborative problem-solving approach, I got to make sure that I don't ironically try to impose my views upon them, but I've got to collaborate with them. And the way to do that is, listen to them first. If this is a teacher in your school who's really struggling with the kids' behavior and doesn't buy what we're talking about, they got good reasons why they're dysregulated themselves, to use that word again. And so I got to listen hard and empathize with them. This is, empathy is one of the greatest human regulators we have.
Correct.
And if you listen hard and really understand what somebody's struggling with and why it's so challenging for them and what they believe, then you can ask them to understand what you're talking about as well. And then you can put your heads together and collaborate. So, it's not so much about convincing people. It's about hearing them out and then asking them to do the same and hear you out. And, look, like I said earlier, I find all of us adults, adults do well if they can too. We're all trying to do the best, whether it's at home, at work, with our kids and our jobs. And so, if we've got some different ideas about how to handle things, there's good reason. And we just got to listen to each other and then put our heads together. And, it sounds easier said than done, but we've shown that you can do that in prisons. We've shown, right next to you there in New Jersey, we've done some work with the New York City Police Department. They've got more than 5,000 uniformed officers and agents in the schools in New York City, and we've worked with them to dramatically decrease assaults and summonses and arrests and things like that, all based upon this approach I'm talking about, which is believing the best out of somebody, thinking skill, not will, listening hard, and not relying on, threats of power and motivational approaches to try to change people's behavior.
That's interesting you brought up threats of power, because that's, in my mind, a lot of what we go through with this tug of war is about control. A lot of it is about ego. A lot of it is about pride. I'm not going to let you as a 13-year-old tell me what to do. And we get into this battle.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we said earlier, when somebody's disrespecting you or something like that, we lose our ability to think clearly as well. And, this is where I said dysregulation gets contagious. I mean, a kid who's being disrespectful isn't using the smart part of their brain, the cortex. They're operating from much lower down in the brain, and then it pisses us off, and we go right there with them. And then, we're looking to sort of strike back. And people don't acknowledge this much, but I think that's part of our love affair with punitive approaches, is we want some revenge.
Yes.
When kids are making our lives miserable. And I don't blame us. I get it. Kids making their life miserable. You want some revenge, but revenge doesn't work.
Right. And see, that for me is the key thing. You need to understand, okay, this is a child who's been suspended 15 times. Have they changed their behavior? No.
Well, and let's be clear, suspensions and things like that in all of our urban public schools throughout the U.S., punitive interventions like detention, suspensions, expulsions are a massive failure.
Yes.
School discipline, it has not been shown. It's one of the greatest ironies. It doesn't work for the kids to whom it is most applied. So the kids who get most of the detentions and suspensions and stuff are exactly the kids for whom it doesn't work.
That's correct.
Again, I want to be clear. We know, though, now why it doesn't work. Because those kids do not struggle. They do not lack the will to behave better. They lack the skills. Focus on those skills, they'll behave better.
It's absolutely right. I mean, and I kid you not. I mean, I get the stink eye, the three-head look whenever I come at them. No, I'm not suspending him again because it's not getting us what we want. There's an alternative way. And interesting enough, you were talking a couple minutes ago about listening. And that's another thing I will tell. I said most of our children, first off, the fact that I'll sit there and let them talk and listen and talk, because there's a difference between talking with somebody and at somebody. And the fact that we'll just have a conversation, just a conversation, they're shocked. That's the first thing. So wait a minute, you're actually listening to me? Yeah, I'm going to listen to you. I want to hear what you're going to say. I want to hear your point of view. So a lot of times, the child and I, during the conversations, will come to our agreement, and that's whenever they'll go back to their classroom and the teacher will tell them, "Oh, Mr. Medley didn't do nothing." It's like, "Oh, yes, he did." And over time, it is the listening piece that I personally believe most of the kids want to begin with. Back to the skill and will thing. The listening piece is a part of they want a positive attention, not necessarily the negative attention that they're always getting with somebody yelling at them and hollering at them and calling them names and so forth. So when someone actually does, to Dr. Ablon's point, when somebody actually sits there and listens to them, well, why did you do that? Why do you feel that way? How could we have done it differently? So forth and so on. They do respond to that. That's my main point is folks, and this is not just kids. This is with grown-ups as well. Folks do respond to what he was talking about.
Yeah, I think that one thing I want to make sure I clarify here in our time together is, if we're talking about behavior being the result of skill, not will, being determined by skill, not will, and kids who struggle with their behavior, or adults, our colleagues, our spouses, our relatives, our friends, ourselves, if we struggle with our behavior, it's about skill, not will, too. How does just talking to people fix the problem? Let me put it to you this way, that if somebody's struggling with problem-solving skills, which is what all the research has shown, and you're trying to help them build better problem-solving skills, there is no better way to do that than engage them in repeated attempts at problem-solving. That's how you practice. You use the problems that are coming up as a result of the challenging behavior as opportunities to practice problem solving. And no, not one or two problem solving conversations helps build the skill. Just like, if you want to become a good golfer, going to the driving range 2 times is not going to make you a good golfer, right?
That's right.
You're going to have to go and practice. And so, when we say we've shown we can improve behavior and build skills, it's by engaging people in repeated problem-solving conversations. What we teach people is a structure to follow. It's not a technique because you can't do it to someone.
Right.
You got to do it with someone. But it's a process with clear guideposts that say, here's how the conversation should go. And if it goes that way, you not only we're going to maximize the chances of solving the problem, but baked into the process, baked into those ingredients that we teach, is the practice on all of those skills that we were talking about earlier: language, communication skills, flexible thinking, social thinking, what we call emotion regulation and self-regulation skills, which are just fancy ways of saying controlling yourself, right, controlling your emotions. All of those things are baked into this problem-solving process that we teach.
Now, it was either, because I read so many books simultaneously, but I believe it was in your book, and I could be wrong, but there was an example wherein a perpetrator had gotten caught by the police, and they were interviewing. He had shot somebody, and they kept asking him what was going through your mind. What were you thinking when you pulled the trigger? Is that in your book?
Yeah,
it is. It
was the first time I worked in a correctional facility, and I was like green, and I didn't know anything, and I thought I did because I had my Ph.D. and everything, but I was talking to this young man, and he was accused of attempted murder, and I asked him what it turns out was not such a smart question. I had asked him, I said, so can you tell me something like, what were you thinking when you did this? And, I'll never forget, because this kid, he leans right in and he looks at me. His face was like, a foot away from mine. And he says to me, "That is the stupidest bleeping question anybody's ever asked me." and I remember thinking to myself, okay, I think I know why, but I'm sort of curious. So I had the gall to ask him. I was like, all right, that may be the stupidest question you ever heard, but do you mind telling me why?
Right.
And he leans in a little closer and he says, "Do you think if I was bleeping thinking, I would have done this?" And it was just like, oh my God, right there, I could have skipped a couple of years of grad school. Like, yeah, of course he wasn't thinking before he did it. And that's why being in prison isn't going to help him either, because no end of punishment is going to help this kid with, you want to use fancy language, a self-regulation skill known as impulse control, which is stopping and thinking about the likely consequences of something you do before you do it. And in fact, the interesting thing is consequences only work if you have good skills in the first place.
That's right.
So this is where that lesson was learned for me, big time, and I've never forgotten it.
Yeah, it leaped out at me when I read it. And I said, wow, because that is, again, a knee-jerk question. What were you thinking? We'll tell it, catch a kid in the hallway, throwing eggs on the floor, doing whatever. What on earth were you thinking? And that jumped, it leaped out at me, that whole thing. Wait a minute, just what you just said. If they don't have impulse control, they're not thinking. So to ask them, what were you thinking, is kind of like fruitless, pointless.
Yeah, basically what we're saying is, what were you thinking when you weren't thinking?
Right. And all these things come into play, again, listening on it, because I'm in a school, I experience this on a daily, and maybe you're not in a school, but some of these same scenarios can happen in the home. They can happen between spouses. They can happen in any scenario, to be honest with you. That's why the book fits across the board. And I'm looking here now, I see the school discipline fix, and then there's treating the explosive child.
Yeah, treating explosive kids.
Treating explosive kids. That's it. There you go. So we have Changeable. The school discipline
very different books.
Okay. Let's talk about the other two a little bit before we go.
Yeah, sure. So Changeable, one we've been talking about, is geared towards everyone, really. It starts out talking about parents and teachers, but talks about where we can apply this on all aspects of our life. Because, some of the folks, as you're listening to this, we're talking about kids, we're talking about people we work with, but let's be clear, we're talking about ourselves too.
Yes.
And every single one of us, myself included, struggles with some of these skills in some of those areas. And, helping yourself to be able to develop those skills starts with having a good understanding of why you may have been struggling with your own behavior. And gosh, it's so, I find, relieving to people to understand that some of our failures in our lives, some of the things that we regret the most, may not have been as simple as, we just weren't sort of working hard enough to do the right thing by ourselves or someone else, that maybe this was about skill, not will, with us too. And if we can figure out the skills, well, we can actually work on those skills. So Changeable, is a big focus like that. The school discipline fix is literally a curriculum for schools like yours that walks people through chapter by chapter how to apply the approach, which has been shown to, decrease challenging behavior, build skills, decrease teacher stress, decrease detention, suspensions, you name it. So it walks you through chapter by chapter, and even has a section for folks who are in leadership positions like yourself in a school, if they want to try to help change the entire school climate doing this. And then Treating Explosive Kids is the oldest book I've written, and that's really meant more for clinical audiences. So if you're a therapist, you're a clinician, you work in like a therapeutic setting of some kind, that's like the manual for this as a therapy. So, there's one for everybody, one for schools, and one for folks working, trying to help people in therapeutic settings.
All right, listening audience, if you don't take anything else away from this interview, just help understand what we're trying to help you understand is there is a different approach. And there are reasons why folks do what they do, and it's always not just as simple as they just doing what they want to do. So if you take nothing else away from what you've heard this morning, that kind of, I'm trying to encapsulate or summarize it for you in terms of what we're trying to help folks understand. And like we've been saying, it's not an easy sell because, and we talked about this earlier on, and maybe we'll almost finish up with this because Dr. Ablon, before, what I do at the end of the interview is I have the guests, they can promote book signings, websites, wherever they'd like to promote. The only thing you can't say is a dollar amount because folks can work that out when they get in touch with you. But before we go, let's go back to this notion of this is soft, because it's not. And that's what I need you to understand before we leave as well. This is not hocus pocus. It's not mamby-pamby. It's not something that's very soft and it really is not. It is an alternative to always trying to dish out punishment or revenge, as Dr. Ablon was talking about, because we really swing to that very quickly. And as I said, it really hasn't worked. It hasn't worked in corporate, hasn't worked in schools, hasn't worked in homes, yet we keep going to that.
Yep, you're absolutely right. And it's time for a change. I mean, what I say to people is, look, the good news is we've got the information now. We know what causes challenging behavior, and we have proven approaches that change it. It's just, we're sort of in this funny time where it's like knowledge emerges, but it takes a while until practice changes.
Right.
And so it's now time to do the hard work of changing how we interact with folks who exhibit challenging behavior, because we know why they're struggling now. Let's do something else. And, if you go out there and remember that this is about skill, not will, anyone can change, because anyone can build new skills, ourselves included.
That is correct. So as I said, at this point, I shut my mic off and you have the opportunity to promote in any manner you choose. Like, it's the only thing you can't say is price or dollar amount, but anything short of that, the mic is yours in terms of promotions. Folks can get your books, your websites, can contact you to come speak. The mic is yours.
All right. Well, I'm not really selling anything, but I would love if people check out the books. But you can find everything on my website, which is stuartablon.com. That's StuartAblon.com, or you can also go to changeable.info. We'll take you to the same place. If you are a parent or a teacher, an administrator in a school who's really struggling with challenging behavior and is looking to learn more about our approach, you might want to check out the website of the program that I direct at Mass General Hospital as well, called Think Kids, and that website is thinkkids.org. That's THINK, thinkkids, KIDS.org. I really, most of all, just would like to encourage people to check out the ideas and learn more about them, see if it resonates, and if it does, to please pass along the information. Because, I got to say, Mark, in this day and age, the communication age, where information flies around the world so quickly, my kids will show me some video that's gone viral, 30 million people watched it overnight, and it's like, it's adorable. It's like a cat playing ping pong or something like that.
Right.
It's cute and all, and we need those distractions. But I constantly say to myself, my gosh, let's harness the power of technology. Let's harness social media. Let's spread the word.
That's right.
If we could just help everybody understand that challenging behavior is a matter of skill, not will, and build in more compassion and understanding, it would make a tremendous difference in the world. So I guess the ask, now that I got the mic here, is just help spread the word that people do well if they can, kids do well if they can. It's about skill, not will. Help us, please, promote that idea that, again, is not just a more accurate, compassionate way of thinking about these kids, but it also leads to more effective interventions.
And again, that's why I was so desirous of having you on the show, because I wanted the message to get out as well, and I wanted the audience to hear it from the horse's mouth, for lack of a better cliche or a better term. I wanted them to hear it from the author.
Happy to be the horse.
And I'm so glad that we're on here, because again, it is a message. As a matter of fact, I'm typing on my Facebook post, because a lot of times I'll be on my social media sites while I'm off the air while you're talking, and I'm actually posting your website, and the quote about the skill versus the will on there. And I laughed when you were talking about stuff going viral, because it was something like a month or so ago, a few weeks ago, about an egg that had gone viral. It was, I forget, it was like a brown egg or the shape of the egg or something. But I mean, I think it had gotten, like, at that point, and maybe it still is, historically the highest number of shares. But it was something like you just said, like, okay, it's cute, but it's an egg.
Right.
So again, I thank you for rising. I did tape the interview, and it'll be archived on my YouTube channel. I send the links out to you, an MP3 version as well as the YouTube version. You can share however you'd like.
Well, it's been a real pleasure being with you here this morning, and I hope the information is helpful to folks, and I hope our paths cross again in the future as well.
Well, same here. Have a great day, and we'll be in touch in terms of sharing the links and everything. And again, you never know. Like I said, I've already read the book, and I've been sending it out on emails and on websites and everything. But I know my staff that if I don't give it to them, now some of them will, because I believe my administration, I think the vice principals did go out and get it, but I'm not sure if any of the teachers did. But if I give it to them and say, we're going to be doing this as a professional learning community or PLC or a book study, then they got to do it. So we may very well be doing one or both, either Changeable or either the school did the second book.
Yep. Awesome. That'd be great.
All right.
Well, Mark, thanks a lot for being in touch, and good luck with your own work. And like I said, hope we cross paths again, okay?
All right. Take care now.
Take care. Have a good weekend.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
You too.